These classic Warhammer hedges are made from nothing more than thick green Scourer pads, some balsa wood, some cardboard for the base, a few paints, and some masking tape. These pan scourers are quite thick and rigid, and this is great because it means I won't need to fold them over to create that thickness. I can just cut strips off at roughly about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters wide, and they're a nice deep green, which is also good because I can just go and highlight them straight away without needing to base coat them in a darker shade of green or anything. They also cut nice and easy, just with a regular pair of scissors, ready to be glued straight onto the base. And here we have 3 hedges from 1 Scourer pad. That's pretty cool, I think. For the base, I just grabbed some normal scrap cardboard and measured this at about 3 centimeters wide, as I found this was good to provide just enough rigidity without being too wide, while still allowing some things like small stones and sand to be glued to the base as well. I did find this next step by no means necessary, but I just went and cut a slight bevel or just a slight angle around the edges of the cardboard just to help it blend in a little bit better when it's placed on the ground. And next I just grabbed some normal masking tape and then just wrapped this around the edges of the cardboard, just making sure to cover up those exposed areas. And any excess was just easily trimmed off with a pair of scissors. After quickly consulting the Great Red Book of Terrain Building Knowledge, I noticed that they had cut 45-degree notches in the end of their bases, and this is so that when the hedges are placed at 90 degrees to each other, they just sit a bit more tight and a bit more neat. The exposed bits of cardboard from trimming the 45-degree notches out were covered in just the same way as before, using some plain masking tape and then just rolling it over the edges and then trimming the excess off with a pair of scissors. And finally, I just placed another strip of masking tape on the underside of the base just to provide a little bit of tension and some extra support. The hedge itself was glued on using some PVA glue, and this was glued straight onto the base. And I held this down just with a roll of masking tape that I'd used earlier, and while the glue was drying, it gave me a chance to work on some other hedges as well. So one thing I really wanted to do was to make some fences as well, and I really wanted to incorporate some of these fences into the hedges. To do this, I just grabbed some thin balsa wood sheet and then trimmed it at about 2 to 3 centimeters wide. I did just eyeball this though and cut each one about 3 centimeters long. And this is good because it meant that when I stuck them into the hedge, there was still a little bit of that post sticking out of the top of the hedge, as we'll see later on. Using a hobby knife, I very carefully poked a little hole into the pan scourer, and this just made sure that that post went through a bit easier. I then just marked out some little dots on the base, and this is where those posts will sit, and just gave it a quick little layout next to the base. And once I was happy with the layout, I then just took the hobby knife and very carefully took some chunks and little pieces out of the fence just to give it a little more character and some more wear and tear. So here's one hedge, and it's just a piece of that pan scour glued straight to the base. And here is a second fence with a piece of hedge just towards the end of it there. It does look very neat and stylized, but that's exactly what I was going for. To keep things nice and simple and classical, I grabbed some PVA glue, brushed it on in small areas, and then just sprinkled on some sand and small stones. And now it was time to start painting them, and this was the part I was looking forward to the most, as this is where it really comes to life and has that classic nostalgic look to it. And I began painting the fences using some dark flesh tone and a little bit of black, thinned down with quite a lot of water, and I found this went on really well to the balsa wood and only needed one pass. So to start painting the hedge, I just used some olive green, and I have this in a sample pot here as I took some olive green from Vallejo's model color, the older formula, and then just had them color match it at the local hardware store, and then into a small sample pot. And I find this is a really nice green as it's very reminiscent of that classic goblin green. And I began to just do quite a heavy dry brush, or more of an overbrush, over all the green areas of the hedge. And after having done a couple of general passes of that olive green over the whole hedge, I then decided to go over some areas more than others just to create a bit of patchiness and just a bit more depth and dimension to it. So once I was happy with the initial first stage of highlighting with that olive green, I then went in with some Vallejo Game Colors Scorpion Green and also painted this over those patchy areas, as well as just a general light dry brush just to really bring out the contrast between the shadowy areas and the lighter areas, which really reinforced that patchy sort of natural look to the hedge. The final stage of highlighting the hedge was done using Vallejo Game Colors Sunburst Yellow, and this was done quite sparingly. I forgot to record it. I pushed the record button on the camera and I think I inadvertently stopped it from recording. But anyway, hopefully you can get an idea of where I've dry brushed it just quite sparingly, and just to really bring out those highlights and give it that classical look. And the first stage of dry brushing on the fence here was done just by using some bronzed flesh by Vallejo Game Color. So for the final highlights on the fence, I just used some dead flesh. And I just placed this, making sure to catch all those corners and sharp edges on the fence, just to really create that nice contrast. And then when it came time to paint the stones and sand on the base, I just used some beastie brown with a spot of black and just mixed that in to get a nice rich earth tone. And this was thinned down quite a lot as well, just to make sure it gets in between all those little nooks and crannies. Then the first stage of dry brushing was done just by using pure beastie brown, and I did this as more of a heavy dry brush, if not a bit of a rough overbrush. The final highlighting on the stones were done just by using some bleached bone from Nostalgia 94. And it really has that classic look to it, giving it that nice worn stone look whilst keeping those nice dark earth undertones. And referring back to the Great Red Book of Terrain Building Knowledge, I just painted all the bare areas on the base using that olive green that I'd started dry brushing the hedge with before. And this just provides a nice strong base colour for that flock to sit over the top of. And once that was dry, some thin downed PVA glue was then painted onto those green areas. And I wasn't too fussed if some of this made its way into the rocky areas just beneath the hedge there, as some of that green scatter material I'll be putting on later will just give those rocky areas a bit more depth and dimension as well. And after a few gentle taps with the handle of a brush and a quick coat of some matte varnish, it was ready to go. And here they are. Honestly, these were just so cool to make because the materials are very readily available and quite cheap as well. And this is just one way of making them and painting them in the same shades as I did. Anyway, thanks heaps for watching, and I'll see you around next time.